The facts of the economy in Northern Ireland, as everywhere in the capitalist world, directly contradict the myths of mainstream economics. Chief among these myths is the idea that a freely competitive capitalist economy left to itself generates full employment. It follows from this idea that unemployment is the product of various external problems caused by disruptive groups such as trade unions and government interference in the free market economy. A second mainstream economic myth is that there's a tendency in developed capitalist economies towards a decrease in inequality, believe it or not, due to the effects of modernisation, including enhanced educational opportunities. So the idea is that capitalism generates equality, if you can believe that one. Moreover, the inequality that does exist is the product of the greater drive, hard work, and entrepreneurial vision of the wealthy. So according to this mainstream view, a person's income is a function of his or her productivity and willingness to work, as simple as that. People are poor because they're not very productive or because they have a weak involvement in the labour force as a result of their own choices. The inequality that does exist is natural, a natural result of differences in skill and effort. In 2004, a leading economist at the University of Chicago, Robert Lucas Jr., said, quote, "Of the tendencies that are harmful to sound economics, the most seductive and, in my opinion, the most poisonous is to focus on questions of income distribution," unquote. According to this mainstream economic view, inequality, such as it does exist, is benign precisely because it can be attributed to different levels of education and skill sets. The real world is somewhat different. Far from a full employment equilibrium, what we see is high levels of unemployment and underemployment. Economic and wealth levels, rather than converging, have diverged sharply, and this divergence cannot be put down to differences in education and skills. In short, both of the principal justifications for the system provided by mainstream economics are bogus. I'd like to look at the current economic situation in Northern Ireland to see how far it diverges from this mainstream economic fantasy. In 2018, Northern Ireland has a low investment, low productivity, low employment and low income economy. Following the global crash of 2008, the Northern Ireland economy has lagged behind the modest growth seen elsewhere in the UK and further behind the recovery such as it is and for who it's for in the Republic. Productivity in Northern Ireland in terms of gross value added per employee is low. So productivity is at 85% of the UK average here. Northern Ireland is one of the UK regions where productivity levels fall below public spending. The northeast of England raises only 29% of its region's gross domestic product in revenues, while public spending reaches 62% of GDP. So there's a deficit in the northeast of England of 33% in spending. Similarly, Wales raises only 30% of its GDP in taxes and spends 66%. And Northern Ireland raises 27% and spends 67%, so there's a deficit of 40% spending. Northern Ireland is the poorest of the UK devolved jurisdictions in terms of living standards. Contrary to widespread expectations of a sustained peace dividend following the Good Friday Agreement, data showed that median household income in 2014-15 was the same as it was 10 years earlier at £380 a week. So things haven't changed. As we saw, mainstream economic theory says that skilled workers are rewarded for their efforts in acquiring employable skills. Again, the reality is different. Rather than being rewarded for their skills, workers who had well-skilled, well-paid jobs in Northern Ireland have lost these jobs in recent high-profile closures and cutbacks, with Michelin, JTI Gallagher, announcing shutdowns in Ballymena, County Antrim, and big job cuts in East Belfast engineering plants, Bombardier and Harland and Wolff. In terms of government expenditure, most departments will experience a real term cut in public spending this year, despite the DUP promise of £1 billion extra from the Tories. The Northern Ireland economy shrank by 1% in the second quarter of 2017. The production sector was responsible for the largest decline in overall output in the economy. The 20% fall in food, beverage and tobacco manufacturing, which accounts for more than a quarter of total manufacturing output, explains much of this decline. Much of this is due to the cessation of production at the Japan tobacco plant in Ballymena, which lost 800 jobs. The services sector also declined by 0.5% due to a continuing slump in retail and hospitality. Public sector productivity also decreased slightly, leaving the construction sector, the developers, as the only sector in the economy to record growth. The collapse of the construction firm Carillion earlier this year is perhaps a sign of change for the worse in the construction sector. It's certainly a sign that putting construction in the hands of private firms is no way to run a proper economy. The failure to restore the Northern Ireland Executive resulted in the Secretary of State bringing in a budget for Northern Ireland through Parliament in Westminster, in which core public spending and most public services will see cuts in real terms. So, Conor McCabe, the economic historian, notes that government policy in relation to Northern Ireland is based on the idea that, quote, any aid to profit-seeking growth is automatically an aid to societal growth. And if reality shows otherwise, it must be the people that are wrong, not profit and its margins, unquote. The idea that profit-seeking is the means to prosperity underlies such policies in Northern Ireland as the privatisation of electricity, the attempt to build prosperity on the back of a property boom, the belief that invest NI is good for NI, the austerity agenda that has resulted in so much misery and chaos in working class communities, and the promise that lowering taxes will somehow raise all boats and produce a prospering economy. A number of disastrous economic policy decisions have been put in place in the last 40 years, contributing to the development of a neoliberal global capitalist order. This is globally speaking. Since the early 1970s, the capitalist class has clawed back the limited gains that had been made by the Western working class in the period between 1945 and the early 1970s, when welfare states were set up, when almost full employment was an expectation, that kind of thing. The collapse of socialism in the peripheral countries of the former Soviet bloc and in China, whose enormous working class has been placed in the service of Western capitalist powers, have greatly increased the power of capital since the early 70s. Examples of disastrous neoliberal policies in the UK have been the privatisation of steel and coal production, of energy production, and of key services including communications. Another key neoliberal policy has been the outsourcing of the provision of goods and services. Yet another has been the use of private finance agreements to fund schools, hospitals and roads and so on. These private finance initiatives are basically glorified hire purchase arrangements in which a consortium of financiers borrows to construct a new asset such as a school, a hospital or a road. As a matter of interest, although Sinn Féin was in theory against the PFIs, in reality Sinn Féin education ministers have signed off on 20 privately financed school buildings. Martin McGuinness stated that PFI offered real potential for value for money solutions, unquote. The financiers must have thought their day had come. The tide of history seems to be against PFIs. The Department of Education in Northern Ireland said last year that PFI does not offer value for money, despite what Martin said. Throughout the world, a fight back against private initiative and privatisation is ongoing. For example, in Norway, following the election of left-wing parties to city councils, 21 services have been deprivatised and brought back into public hands in local councils. At local level around the world to push back against the profiteers. While we applaud and endorse these struggles, we are a workers' party. Our goal is the complete management and control of society by and for the working class. That is our goal, and that goal informs all our struggles, including the struggle against public service profit-mongering.
I think, for instance, we should demand that public projects should be done in a proper way. A system of tendering, for instance, which would cut out a lot of things. And I cite, for instance, the water service. The water service is a public company per se, and it is restrained in many ways. Checking on its clients, not its clients, its contractors. And you know, there's very little entrepreneurialism within those public bodies, corporations, which, for instance, why doesn't the water service bottle water? It's so good. I mean, their water is better than anybody. Why? You know, I can't see things like those sort of things that are taken away from people. And I cite, for instance, in France, years ago, what they did was they had 7 people who tendered for contracts. And these people had to demonstrate that they were fit and able to tender for the contracts. And this was only in public contracts. The 7 people, and it wasn't brown envelopes, which happens here all the time. Every one of them at the highest level in Northern Ireland, so mentioning no names, have a brown envelope system between each other. The first one and the last one was automatically done away with. So that left number 1 and number 7, they were discarded. And they added the other 5 contracts together, divided them by 5, and took who was nearest to that. Now, you may think that's very simple, and it is very simple. But what it guaranteed that you were getting a job done from someone who was able to do it, and they weren't going to go bust, and Joe Public wasn't going to be left picking up the strands.
It's a massive subject matter that Justin covered in a very comprehensive and thorough way. It's hard to follow it, but it does throw up certain thoughts. I can only think and speak in a general way. I wouldn't have his expertise for detail. I'm just thinking of a quote somebody said, a great man in his books on sale down there. He says, our demands most modest are, we only want the earth. And that's the motto now for the Socialist Labour Party. That man was Ireland's most famous Marxist theoretician and revolutionary, James Connolly. And I think in terms of looking at, listening to what Joe said, in terms of men of no property, which goes back a few hundred years, we represent the working class, those who have no investment in the capitalist market-run economy. It's not run for or by us or for our needs, it's run for the interest of the few and the interest of profit and global capital, of which we are a tiny little part here.
I want to make one small point in terms of PFIs. PFIs were not just meant to give large sums of money to the rich and the wealthy. They were meant actually to take workers out of the public sector as well, and they invariably ended up on lower terms and conditions. And I think the fact that we need to factor in as well, it wasn't just Martin McGuinness was using PFIs as he was. I mean, it was awful. But actually the other Sinn Féin minister, Barbara Drew, used actually a lot of PFIs. The big car park in the Royal only this year came back into in-house after 25 years of rinsing the public and the trust sort of dry and making a fortune. They allowed that to happen. We've had an assembly and we've had 2 big parties that allowed 0-hour contracts to come in Northern Ireland and refused point blank actually to stop using them. As they said, it made us more flexible. And there were dual standards on it all, because Invest NI, when they were bringing in the higher grade jobs, they insisted that they not be 0-hour contracts. They did no such thing for the lower paid. And by the way, the majority of jobs that came into Northern Ireland in the first session of the new administration from 2007, they wasted over £1 billion in putting jobs, low-paid jobs, all into the wrong places, and it didn't bring in new investment. The money went to local companies, big companies, and multinationals. So that's what our administration done for us. They give us pay freezes and have workers now in the health service on a different rate of pay from their colleagues in England, Scotland and Wales. And much as I'd love to say it was them big fat Tories, it wasn't. It was the DUP and Sinn Féin. Thank you. Yeah.